Here are the 4 undefeated UFC fighters that you don't want to miss this Saturday. After 28 days without any events, the UFC is finally back for 2025 for their first event of the year at the UFC Apex for UFC Fight Night, Dern vs Ribas 2. Even though this card has a lot of unknown fighters, there's actually a lot of up-and-comers that may be the future champions of the UFC. In total, there's 4 undefeated mixed martial artists, 3 of them being on the prelims and 1 of them being on the main card, and 2 of them are making their UFC debut. So up first, we have Nurullo Aliev, who's also known as the Tajik Eagle. It's funny because when this guy made his UFC debut, he had a lot of comparisons to Khabib because they looked very similar and they also had the same nickname, the Eagle. This guy is 9-0 as a professional. He's 1-0 in the UFC. He won his UFC debut back in February of 2023 via majority decision. During that fight, he was able to land 3 takedowns and had nearly 11 minutes of control time. So it's safe to say the comparisons to Khabib are not that crazy because this guy has some great wrestling. He fights at 155 and he's going to be matched up against Joe Solecki, who's 13-5 as a professional, so it'll be a good test for him. Up next, we have Magomed Gadzhiyasulov, who's also 9-0 as a pro. He's also 1-0 in the UFC and has had 1 Dana White Contender Series fight as well. In his UFC debut, he was able to land 5 out of 5 takedowns and had nearly 10 minutes of control time. I mean, you can tell by the name already that this guy has some elite wrestling. He's going to be fighting Bruno Lopez at light heavyweight. Bruno is 1-1 in the UFC, so it should be a good matchup. Up next, we have Jacobe Smith, who's also 9-0 in the UFC. Something about the 9-0s in this card. He's going to be making his UFC debut against Preston Parsons, who's 2-3 in the UFC, so it should be a good debut opponent for him. Now, even though this is his debut, he has had 1 Dana White Contender Series fight. He did win that one in the second round via TKO due to elbows. And lastly, we have Bashi, who's 13-0 as a professional mixed martial artist. He's also making his UFC debut, and he has 1 fight in Dana White Contender Series. He was able to submit his opponent in a rear naked choke in the second round. He's going to be fighting Christian Rodriguez, who's 5-2 in the UFC, so it's going to be a tough matchup for him. But if he gets through this, he can make a big statement in his debut fight. And this is a guy that will probably fight for the title in the next couple years. Alright, so that's all 4 of the undefeated mixed martial artists that are going to be on this Saturday's card at UFC Fight Night. So make sure you look out for these fighters and let us know in the comments which fights are you most looking forward to in 2025.